Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today we have a wonderful guest with us here, Eva Yazhari. She is the CEO of Beyond Capital, which is a nonprofit impact investment organization that believes that investing is a mindset and it can inspire good and it can improve the lives of people in impoverished communities. What they do is they invest in for-profit social enterprises throughout India and East Africa. And she's also the co-host of the Beyond Capital podcast and founder of the online magazine, The Conscious Investor. And so she has a lot of experience, over 15 years experience in this industry of investing. And I wanted her to come on and talk to us through this series on movement makers because, number one, they're a movement maker themselves. And they're also, there's a lot of times the question that I get from people is, how do I fund my movement? How do I get in touch with investors that, would be interested in what we're doing? And so we'll get to hear a little bit of that perspective and what they look for in companies. So I think this is going to be a really, really great conversation. And I'm excited that you're here, Eva. And I'm excited that our listeners are here and our viewers are here. And we're looking forward to having a great chat today.
Thank you. I'm really excited to speak with you as well.
Excellent. And I want to do a shout out to Karen Eldad. She is actually the one, she's going to be on our show coming up here soon, but she's actually the one, when I was talking to her about having her on the show, she mentioned that if you're going to talk to movement makers and people that are doing great things in the world, then you want to talk to Eva. So thank you, Karen, for that. And you'll want to, obviously it's not out yet, but it will be out in about a month or so. Watch for Karen's interview as well. So Eva, let's talk about you though. Let's talk about Beyond Capital. Let's start off with how you got involved in impact investing and where it's taken you from there.
Absolutely. So almost 11 years ago, I was sitting at my desk on Wall Street and thinking a lot about what more there could be for me as a finance professional and how I could use my skills for good. I grew up in a family with a history of public service. My grandfather started a health clinic in Tanzania in the 1950s, and he moved his entire family to Africa, which included 5 children and then extended to 9 children by the time he got back to the US in the late 60s. And I grew up with those stories and stories of public service all around my family. And it became a part of my DNA. I mean, it might actually be a part of my DNA, but it definitely became part of my story. And when I was working on Wall Street in the hedge fund industry primarily, I saw a lot of things that, I'm coming to terms with not being okay with. And one of them, frankly, was the subprime mortgage trade, which was made very famous by the movie The Big Short. And I'll never forget walking out of the pitch for that trade from a hedge fund manager that we were invested in, where we literally said, this can't be possible. It cannot be possible to profit from the demise of individual families who have taken out mortgages that are not appropriate for them. And that was a little bit of an aha moment for me, to try to think differently and to think in a way where investing can be done with awareness. And so I ended up leaving for personal reasons. My husband was living in a different place. So I had this clean break and decided to start Beyond Capital as a way to use my skills. And I co-founded it with my husband, although I run the day-to-day. So use our collective skills and the skills of our networks to invest in companies that have a social impact attached to them. Coincidentally, for my family background in Africa, as well as in India. So we actually have an investment in Tanzania as well to date, which I think really helps come full circle.
So now you started this, and thank you for sharing. I mean, this is I hear this a lot more about people that are saying, you know what, that's just not okay that business operates this way, or a particular industry operates this way. And then out of that is birthed a movement, is birthed a company, is birthed the initiative, is birthed the movement as a result of something that they saw. So they saw a problem and then chose to create a solution for it. Now, it's nice to say, you say, oh, well, this is what I did. But I'm sure there's a lot that goes into starting your own company, investment fund, and gaining buy-in from people to support this. So tell us a little bit about that process of even gaining your first investors, some of the roadblocks that maybe our listeners can relate to and learn from, because no matter what their movement is, you don't have a movement without other people getting involved, right? So
It's
they need to know how to do
absolutely
that.
true. Absolutely. I think first and foremost, it comes down to personal motivation. And then I'll talk about some roadblocks and how to attract individuals and companies and energy to the movement. But I really do think it comes down to personal motivations. To share, one of the women in my network who arguably is one of the first impact investors, made her money in Silicon Valley, but also had a very similar upbringing. She grew up in Hawaii, and in Hawaii, she saw the fragility of nature. And she actually did one of the early environmental design programs. And when she practiced as an architect, she realized that sustainability really wasn't of interest to her clients, but it was very core to her being. And so when she exited a number of companies that went public that she had worked for and received stock in, she and her husband thought a lot about, how they could build a movement, which has become impact investing. Largely, they've been a beachhead for impact investors to learn from, and they really push the envelope. But it's because of the personal motivations that they both had. Similarly, with Beyond Capital, my story, really bringing that passion to the table has been extremely key. Now, in terms of resource attraction, something I've learned from Coach Karen Eldad, who has been my coach for about 3 years, is helping people understand what the opportunity is for them. If I'm going to be a little vulnerable here, we spent the first 6 years very insular. As investors, I'm a mathematics major. I'm a deal person. I love the deal process. I love due diligence. But frankly, that wasn't enough to build the movement. And when we took the step up and started communicating differently, being more artistic in the way that we communicate our work, being more creative, and I'm actually the daughter of 2 artists. The work is on either side here. And so I have that in me, but being able to tap into the creative side and speaking to a wider audience about what impact investing is, and frankly telling them, this is an opportunity for you to get involved. You know that this investing with awareness exists, but you may not know how to apply it to your life. And here's the opportunity to do so. So I think the roadblock was thinking that the work itself would actually be enough. But the reality is applying a kind of more creative energy to that work is what really opened up the movement. And now, in addition to the investing that we do at Beyond Capital and the women's health companies or the renewable energy access businesses that we funded, we've also launched a podcast where we interview purpose-driven leaders who are creating this kind of stable of CEOs that I can also draw from and think about when I have conversations like this, to say it really is about personal motivation. Because 30 years ago, recycling wasn't really a thing, or at least for corporates wasn't really a thing. Sustainable supply chains weren't really a thing. Even manufacturing and doing it in a way that really was kind to the employees that were working in that type of environment was not really that important. But there have been entrepreneurs doing this type of thing for decades. And they've just been motivated personally to do that.
Got it. So when you started, who was kind of like the early adopters for you? And not specific people, but sort of in general, like who was drawn? So I love what you said there about the creative side, because sometimes people think, and I've done this too, where it's like, well, isn't this enough? I mean, this is this brilliant idea. When I was first starting out in business, it was like, I have this great idea and everybody's going to love it. The build a better mousetrap and the world will, beat a path to your doorway. Well, not so much. So, you've got to create the connection, like you were talking about. And I love you pointing that out, because there's a lot of people who say, yeah, but don't you understand? We need to do this. And it's like, yes, and you need to communicate it in such a way that people are actually enrolled. So in doing that, as you started to make that shift, who were the people that showed up? Were they already in your circle and then you just reached out and enrolled them and one by one, or did you start to go out to a wider audience, to like
Yeah.
find the people that would be the right fit?
Initially, it was our inner circle, and most people were drawn to our work because we are set up currently as a nonprofit, as you mentioned, and we take donations and then we invest that money and then we recycle that money over time. So one person put it very simply as it's the gift that keeps on giving. So you give a donation, you give a charitable donation, and then your money keeps revolving. And they found that really compelling. When we started to open up and be more communicative and be more strategic about how we communicated our impact. For example, we know that we impact the lives of 4.1 million people. We know that we impact the lives of 2.8 million women. And we know that every dollar we invest improves a dozen lives, so 12 individuals' lives. And those were really tangible things that more people could kind of hold on to. And so now we have many donors from groups that I, were never aware of. We've actually had people sign on and to our website and become what we call an ambassador, which is a level of commitment for us, where people get to learn about impact investing. They've signed on without speaking to us or, without having a personal connection to me. But I absolutely agree with kind of what I would assume the premise of your question is, which is, when you start to be more communicative, you can actually attract more support, not only monetary support, but also energetic support and support in the form of skills and time, which the companies in our portfolio also really need. And so we saw it as a tremendous win-win. And really, at the end of the day, that's what we're looking for in the resources, time, people that we attract to Beyond Capital and the other projects that we're working on.
So with that in mind, actually, your organization, is it made up of volunteers? Do you have paid staff? What does it look like to be able to run this operation?
Yeah, so we've been really lucky to have some very long-term volunteers. Um, they all comprise our investment team. And so they say that they're having their second career at the same time as their first. And it's fascinating. We've actually recruited them all from top business schools. They all have MBAs and have full-time jobs, but they give us between 20 to 25 hours per month of their time to help assist with deciding where we invest. And they also travel to India and East Africa once or twice a year to represent our work. So they're kind of an extension of me, which is when you're running a nonprofit, you have to find ways to leverage. But it's also helped us maintain fidelity to our core mission of funding seed stage companies. So we didn't talk too much about our portfolio, but we are the first professional capital in all of those businesses. And so we're investing in between $50,000 to $100,000 into small businesses that really just need that first vote of support to grow and scale. Then we also have individuals that give the companies in our portfolio assistance. So they provide expertise or financial modeling assistance and legal support. So basically help the companies do what they do better. And so we have been able to pull together some volunteers, but I do believe that charities, nonprofits need to be run like businesses. And we're actually at Beyond Capital, we're entering a new phase. So we are raising a for-profit fund in 2020. But not much will really change because we're operating like a for-profit fund. We're just funded by grant funding. And I think that that's really important because we need to attract the best talent to the world's most pressing problems.
Yes, absolutely. Well said. And I'm glad that you pointed it out. And I'd actually like to dive in a little bit further into the type of companies that you look for. How do you determine which ones? So it's kind of like when in my intro, when I was talking about people saying, how do I find people to invest in what I'm doing? So being on that flip side of saying, this is what we look for as
Yeah.
sort of criteria for companies that, maybe there's certain areas of,
Yeah.
industry that you focus in on and all of that?
Well, we invest in companies that improve the lives of people living under the poverty line. And over time, we've had the luxury of refining our criteria, meaning we have certain sectors that we invest in: healthcare, energy access, agriculture, financial inclusion, as well as livelihoods. And those are all areas where people who earn roughly less than $4 a day have access to basic goods and services. And that's what our core mission is. But I think when it comes down to maybe more broad strokes, it's really about the people. We believe that we're investing in people and we are looking for committed founders. I think if you think about our investments, for example, we're in a renewable energy distribution company that sells solar lanterns in rural Rajasthan in India and is scaling throughout India. It could be an acquisition target for an Amazon or a Unilever or a big company later on. And we get the question very often, well, how do you know that that company will maintain its social impact? And the answer is, we know the founder is committed. We've known her, we've been invested since 2013. We know that she is really behind this mission. So being able to prove that and show that, I think, is really important. On the flip side, we also are very cautious of companies that portray a mission trap, meaning they're extremely enthusiastic about the social impact side, but there's really not a business model there. Because for us, we are an investor. And so being able to tell the story of how the company will also be sustainable from the ground up, meaning what the unit economics look like in that business, and be able to really walk through those qualities of the company with us is really, really key for us. So those are kind of like the two sides of a coin, because whilst we would not want to have an entrepreneur who is purely, focused on business, because we know, or just financial profit, we know that will take them off track from time to time, because in the areas where we work, the reality is time becomes a factor. It takes longer to build that distribution network in rural India than it might in Mumbai or Delhi or one of the other big cities. And so we're really looking for an entrepreneur that has that commitment to social impact, but the rigor that goes along with it to grow and scale.
So you're investing in companies then in the U.S. and or are they already located there? Like, so because these are larger companies, you're talking about $50,000-$100,000. If you're talking about small rural areas, that's where like Kiva comes in and they put in a few $1,000s into a lady who's wanting to launch her, egg harvesting business or something like that. And what you're talking about is what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the companies that are going to bring their services and bring support to those areas, but on a larger scale.
Yes, but they are local companies.
Okay.
So there are businesses that are operating in India, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Uganda, the 5 countries where we invest. Mm-hmm. They're mixed between local entrepreneurs and American or European entrepreneurs that are kind of have repatriated to those areas. But they are between microfinance, what you described as Kiva, and kind of larger scale investing, maybe Series A, Series B, Series C investing. We are really in the seed rounds of these companies. And $100,000 is a lot of money in these areas, but it's also not the whole round typically. So typically the companies are raising between $250,000 to almost $1 million in their seed round. The quality of companies over the past 10 years has gotten a lot greater. The companies have become more sophisticated in getting straight out of the gate. So we have seen the seed rounds grow and grow, which is why we're really excited about raising a for-profit fund, because it'll allow us more capital to deploy into more social enterprises.
So Dad, do you actually have, is the entire amount passed through? So that's donated. Like how does that work? So you have monies that are coming to you and people are donating and investing, and then you determine where you're going to invest it, and is there like a percentage that you work on, that percentage of the money that you collect
Yeah.
that
Our
is.
board, oh,
Mhm.
sorry, please
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. You know what I'm asking. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our board covers our entire org expenses. And so then I think depending on, somebody out there building a movement, how they plan to structure it, my first piece of advice would be to do so through a enterprise structure, through a for-profit structure. Especially having worked in the nonprofit structure for the past 10 years. We are very lucky to have our board fund our org expenses, so then we can go to all of our donors and say, you're funding the companies directly. And they love that. And so basically any money we take in, put into the businesses, and then when we get a return, and we do have one return where we doubled our money while improving 150,000 lives access to eye care. And so we took that money and we recycled it back into the portfolio.
Awesome. So let's talk about that. Some of those fun stories. I know we're also going to talk about your conscious investor and
Yes.
what's beyond capital for you.
Yes.
But before we do that, I love stories of
Yeah.
like, that's a great example,
Yeah.
improving eye care for
Yeah.
that many people. Like, what are some of these stories that really inspire you, re-inspire you, your team?
Yeah. Well, I think really we're very inspired by the impact on the lives that we're having and the numbers, the leverage effect that every dollar can impact 12 lives. And the reason for that is when you put the money into the business, the company, you kind of kickstart growth. And since it's a sustainable model, it grows and scales beyond your initial contribution to that investment round. But one example, I'll walk you through ERC Eye Care, which was another company we invested in 2013. It was founded by an eye doctor in Assam in India, which is kind of like towards the northeast of the country near the Himalayas, and it's quite secluded. So there wasn't access to simple diagnosis, glasses, cataract surgeries. And this doctor saw that opportunity and started a business that was kind of like a hub and spoke. So it had various clinics in the hubs, and then I was in the spokes, and then in the hub was the surgery centers where people could go for their cataract surgeries, which help improve almost every area of their lives. And one of his patients, Guna, was born into a family of tailors, sadly lost sight in one of his eyes when he was a child, and then the other eye got infected. And so he was simply not able to work until he was able to go to ERC Eye Care and get treatment. And so every single day, there are people that are being impacted by the companies that we've invested in. Another really standout aspect of Frontier Markets are the 3,000 women that the company works with. The business actually started out trying to sell these solar lanterns through a series of like a distribution channel of male sales people. There's often like a guy in the village, and he has a little local Best Buy, and he's also the DJ, and he's the hub for everything electronics. So they tried to work with that individual, but then they slowly realized that there were women who had even deeper tentacles into the neighborhoods that they wanted to reach. And they saw this win-win in bringing those women on as their sales agents. And they've generated $3 million in income for 3,000 women. And we've met
Wow.
some of these women. We met two of them in October, and they went from housewives who were really not able to leave their house. So there was no dignity in that role for them. And it wasn't a choice for them, to being the breadwinner in their family, and now having things like washing machines and blenders and, obviously lighting in their house because it's the crux of the business. So they really believe in the product, but being able to also walk through the streets of their village more freely, and leave their houses to feel empowered to be able to do that. And so the connection to the emotional connection to the people that we're impacting is, I think, really powerful for us as a team, for the volunteers, and for the people that get involved in our work. They love to hear these stories and see that firsthand as well on the ground, which was something that we did in October with some of our donors.
That is amazing. Well, and to be able to go there and to have trips that they actually get to experience them, that is, yeah, it brings it much more real. So you mentioned about every dollar we impact 12 people. I think
Yeah.
that's what you said.
Mhm.
So how do you figure that? I mean, obviously you have a calculation, but there's like,
Yeah.
give us an idea, because I'm sure that I know I was thinking that, and I'm sure there's others that probably are thinking like, how do you actually know that? How do you
Yeah.
measure that?
Well, measuring social impact is a really important topic in the impact investment field. For us, we're very lucky because we are investing in socially minded companies. So it's in their DNA to measure their social impact, but we do work with them upfront on setting up metric systems. So, for instance, with the renewable energy distribution company, we want to know not only how many products are they selling, what their revenues are, what their profits are, but also what types of products, how many women they're working with to sell these products, what the average income of those females is. And then if we can get data like this, are those women saving that money? What are they doing with that money? How is it improving their lives? And on the customer side, similarly, how is having a solar lantern improving their lives? And how is having access to other kind of household goods that the company is adding on over time, improving their livelihood? And with that extra time, what are they doing? Are they working or studying? Or frankly, the CEO said on our podcast with her, which came out this week, shock to the world, they're resting between things that they're doing. So I think that really that kind of connection to the story is important, but then having those metrics in place to substantiate it is key. So basically we collect data from all of our portfolio companies, and that's how we come down to distill our investment and what impact that is having. We also look at something called capital mobilization, because one of our goals is to increase the amount of impact investment capital that there is for companies that we invest in. We do so often by having a reputation of doing very good quality due diligence and kind of having the stamp of approval on the business, and also helping them get to their next funding round and sometimes bringing in other funders. So we know that the amount of money that we have invested has catalyzed 54 times the amount of capital that the companies in our portfolio have raised. And so that's for us a great magnifier of impact as well.
Yeah. Very rewarding. Very
Oh
rewarding.
yeah.
That's
I mean,
wonderful. Yeah.
for me, this is not a job. This is a lifestyle, and this is a mindset that gets me up every single day, very fulfilled.
Yeah. And your podcast, a great point on your podcast that I just wanted to highlight is that you are actually showcasing stories of your clients. And so you're actually creating greater exposure for them to an audience that they may not have had. Like for that example, that lady, that people can hear the story about that. And that's it's an added benefit. There's inspiration, but there's also added visibility that you're able to do through the podcast.
Well, intentionally, I have actually decided to sprinkle in the Beyond Capital portfolio companies. So we actually, after I think it's our 12th episode, because we just launched in October. We then just on the 12th episode, we interviewed the first Beyond Capital portfolio company, because I'm also really inspired by this new wave of companies. Most of them tend to be B corporations, just coincidentally, and a B corporation is a business that is certified in social, environmental, and governance criteria to be meeting standards that are more kind of consistent with social values, and not just single bottom line financial return, but considering other stakeholders and other qualities in the performance of the business. And that was a challenge, I think, and an interest for myself and my co-host to learn more about different types of companies. So manufacturing or food businesses, recycling, and actually a lot of the entrepreneurs we've interviewed and CEOs have been in the US to date. But yes, I agree. Giving exposure to my portfolio companies is part of what I really thrive on doing.
Yeah, telling their stories as well.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what's beyond capital for you. You've
Yeah.
got the conscious investor.
Yes.
You've got a magazine, online magazine, and so tell us a little bit about that next step. It's interesting because sometimes, and I've had being being a business coach and working with entrepreneurs that are looking to do something, they're just, some of them are even deciding like, what is my purpose? What is my calling?
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of have this mindset a lot of times. It's like, well, I need to find the thing that I'm going to do for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like they create a box for themselves.
Yeah,
And not to say like, the kind of the arena that you're playing in, but it evolves.
it does.
And so there's freedom in that
Yeah,
you don't have to get, you don't, just because you create something, you don't have to get stuck there. As you know,
yeah,
you create a movement, and maybe that movement goes beyond you, and then maybe you go on and do something else, whether it's in the same
yes.
industry or in a completely different industry. It's actually okay to do that, and
Yeah.
so yeah, I just wanted to highlight that, because even just you evolving and say, okay, now I'm going to do something beyond that. I'm going to continue to grow. To be a movement maker, you got to continue to grow.
Yeah, and I think movement makers are driven by growth, or the need, the desire to grow, and that's definitely one of my main personal drivers. You are absolutely right, though. I think putting oneself in a box and saying I must only focus on this, I don't think is a good strategy for anybody, even outside of movements and kind of more the traditional world of business. But what has really stood out to me as, and I'm taking this on for the series as a movement filter, is certain ways that the impact investing movement is not engaging everybody. I think we're living in a really great time where anybody with a 401k has access to environmental, social, and governance investing, also known as ESG or SRI, but it might not be their first priority. It might not be the thing that they wake up in the morning thinking about, because they have a family, a job, a house, a mortgage, whatever it is, or a community around them that isn't talking about how to integrate their values with their money. And so the Beyond Capital initiatives that I've started in the past fall have really focused on speaking to a wider audience about impact investing, and almost speaking to the fact that impact investing is a mindset and it's a tool that can be applied across disciplines. It can apply, it's a lifestyle, really. And the power of tapping into that is just something that's been so profound in my life that I really want to share it with others. And I think once you know that you can have alignment with your values, you can't unknow that, which is kind of a problem, because you start thinking about every area of your life and how aligned or not aligned it may be. And, we're all human. I have to get on a plane from time to time. I'm also not 100% convinced that batteries and electric cars are good for the environment. So I haven't fully converted that in my life. I'm still kind of figuring certain things out on my own, but I do know that aligning my money with my values has an immense power. And so, along with the podcast, which I've already mentioned, I launched The Conscious Investor, which is an online magazine that sheds light on the world of impact investing. It allows for somebody to learn about everything from what is a B corporation to how to be an impact investor at all different levels with all different means, to learn about companies and learn from other people who are practicing impact investing. And so it's theconsciousinvestor.co online. It's a weekly newsletter that comes to your inbox with very little content, intentionally created for somebody to just kind of have their weekly dose of impact investing and learn about groups and people that I think are really at the top of their game, that have something to offer a wider community. And in doing this, I'm hoping to create a knowledge base amongst more than foundations or academics or high net worth individuals or tech entrepreneurs to become impact investors, and also to know the difference between superficial impact, which is ESG kind of falls in that category. I have it in my portfolio. We call it do no harm, where you're excluding tobacco and firearms and other groups, but to know the difference between that and deep impact. And deep impact is what I would consider, investing in either what we do at Beyond Capital, the types of companies that we're investing in at Beyond Capital, but an example in the US would be investing in some of the businesses on the podcast that are taking the kind of most thorough approach to how to get food from farm to table, or how to even recycle plastic wrap, which is notorious for not being able to be recycled and things like that. So that's kind of the bridge that I'm trying to create for individuals. And it was born out of an observation, and often, frankly, sitting at dinner parties within certain networks where we're all sitting there and the conversation around values and money never has come up over the past 10 years. Whereas I knew this community was over here, the impact investment community was over here doing really interesting things, but there was absolutely no connection point. So the last thing I would say is, just for those who are listening and thinking about building their own movements, is to think a little differently about how that movement could maybe reach a different audience, or how it could, get bigger through, people that aren't exposed to it. Because right now, that's what I'm really excited about with impact investing.
You bring up a really good point. And for me personally, actually, I am launching something right now. And I was talking to a gentleman last week about it. And he said, I love your idea. And he said, I'm not sure that's the audience. Well, because those are the people that are already in the game. They're already, a movement maker. They're already a difference maker or leader of transformation. And he said, but there's this whole group of people that don't know about it. And I was sitting there and I laid in bed and I was thinking, he's right. He's right. It's not, because that's our natural inclination. It's like, I want to connect more of the difference makers, and that's what I love doing. And so, but there's all of the people that aren't aware of this, or are not yet in the game, that want to be making a greater impact, but that don't know how to, or think that they have to do some whole transformational thing to make that happen, like quit their job and start doing something totally different, which doesn't necessarily have to be the case. And so it's just great what you just said there, because I went through this literally last week, where I was like, yeah, we could start here, and that's great. There's going to be a number of people in that arena that are going to want to be part of it. But ultimately, it's actually for the group of people that don't know anything about this. Yeah. And then we can have them create, help them to create impact where they weren't creating impact before. So great distinction. Because a lot of movements, we tend to gather the people. And that's also why I asked about followers. Like, how do you start with your inner circle, and you kind of go from there gradually. And there's a whole world out there. So how do we shift entire cultures?
Yeah.
In the way they think. Yeah. So
thinking about that this morning, actually, shifting cultures, as part of some of the editorial content we have coming up for the Conscious Investor. And maybe just to describe briefly how I systematically intended to do that. I'm a goopy, so I'm a fan of Gwyneth Paltrow's lifestyle brand, mostly because it has impacted my family's health in a very significant way. And so I always have Goop in the back of my mind, but 2 years ago, I zeroed in on Goop, which nobody else in my industry would have ever thought of being a place to talk about impact investing, as a place to pitch a story idea, to have a conversation about, for lack of a better term, detoxifying your portfolio, detoxing your portfolio, which is very much so in line with the Goop parlance. And that led to getting to know an editor there, Stacey Lindsay, whom has become the Conscious Investor editorial director. And the perspective that she brings is being able to speak in a different way about impact investing and create content that can resonate more widely. So I absolutely agree with you that there are ways to connect people that are not connected already to some great things that are happening out there.
Well, it actually comes full circle to what you were talking about in the beginning, about having to create the message, deliver the message in such a way that people actually get it. And so, yeah, this is great. Well, I encourage our listeners to go to, I'm going to give you a couple of sites, and of course, this will all be on Leaders of Transformation in the show notes, but beyondcapitalfund.org is the first one. And then and then it's consciousinvestor.co.
Mhm.
go there as well and sign up for that online magazine so that you can get in and know. And I appreciate the fact that you don't have so much content that people just
Yeah.
cannot consume it. And so it's bite-sized pieces, because I think that sometimes we think, and there's a lot of that going on, where it's like the more content, the better. Not necessarily the case. Sometimes, yeah, you do need to detox a little bit and get really focused. So thank you, Eva. I really appreciate you being here. And I feel your heart, and, here you've got this brilliant mathematical mind, and yet you have such a heart for people, and that you're driven by it's like you're the epitome of somebody who is led by their heart, but's taking their head with them along
Yeah.
the way. So
I'm
I love
grateful
it.
for that. It's an absolute pleasure to have this chat with you. Thank you so much, Nicole.
My pleasure. And thank you to our listeners and our viewers for being here. I'm a big believer that leaders of transformation take action. Nothing happens until you take action. That action actually might be to stop and check in and become aware of your thinking and your mindset. So that might be a being action, if you will. It might be, just to stop and check in. But at some point there's an awareness, and then there's a choice, and then there's action that needs to be taken. And so I encourage you today with maybe something that Eva has said that has resonated with you. Maybe it's the curiosity of what they're doing, that you go check out their website, or maybe it's something that you say, you know what, I have been thinking about doing something for so long. And maybe it's just taking a few minutes a day and starting to journal and map that idea out, or talking to somebody, or changing the conversation at the next cocktail party that you're at. But take action on something and sort of test the waters, because while it's current, otherwise you put it off, and one day I'll make a difference and I'll change the world. Well, you know what, that one day is today. We all get to start today. So I encourage that. We'd love to hear your stories. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com, reach out to me through that platform. Of course, we're on social media. You can find us there. We actually have really great stories. I love sharing stories of people who are doing really good things, good news in the world, but specifically companies and individuals that are transforming their communities, transforming their countries, and so forth. And so we have a Facebook page where I'm constantly resharing stories of things that I see, that I come across, that are in line with that. And so it's very inspiring, good news to combat the negative news that's out there. There's a lot of really amazing things that are happening in the world. So follow us there, and you can learn more about that. And then, of course, if you have a movement, or if you've got an initiative that you're doing that is making a huge impact, we want to hear about it. And so that we can celebrate with you, we can support you, and even perhaps shed some light on what it is that you're doing with our community. So reach out to us. And also, if you like this interview, if you enjoyed it, share it with your friends. Get the word out, help us get the word out. This is how this all, this is the organic growth of this community and this initiative. But also go on Apple iTunes podcasts and leave us a rating, a review. That really helps us in the rating system, so that we can get a greater reach. We have listeners in over 130 countries, and we want to continue to extend that out, because for many, this is a lifeline for them to be inspired and encouraged as they are out there doing their thing in their corner of the world. And so you can help us and create impact through that. So we appreciate that, and we appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.